Greetings, dear listener. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new scary stories and support me with a like. Enjoy listening.
In the village of Kemlia, Ichalkovsky district of Mordovia, mysterious cases of mass death of small domestic animals and birds were noted. Local residents tend to blame this on a rare predator known as the chupacabra, translated from Spanish as goat vampire. Over the past month, the beast has destroyed more than 100 rabbits in private farms in the region. The nature of the damage on animal carcasses differs from the wounds typically caused by stray dogs. In addition, dogs immediately eat their prey. In this case, the rabbits were literally crushed. Farmer Alexander Makhotkin noted another unusual detail. All the heads of the killed animals were in the same position. He emphasized that this is the first case in the region in the last 30 years. Previously, local residents had to endure massive attacks by stray dogs, but they operated on a much smaller scale. The mysterious animal already appeared some time ago in the immediate vicinity of the Republic, in the neighboring Nizhny Novgorod region. Its location was determined not far from the city of Viksa. Here, the chupacabra destroyed almost 200 rabbits and chickens within a month. The Kemlians are sure that it was from here that the predator migrated to Mordovia. In addition, the dead chupacabra was captured on photo and video in the Amur region. Although it has not yet been possible to reliably identify the found animal as belonging to this species, zoologists suggest that it may be the corpse of another predator, quite common in this part of Russia. Residents of Kemli have not yet contacted the police about the mass extermination of domestic animals. Currently, they are trying to protect farms from ruin on their own. They are strengthening outbuildings and are going to organize voluntary patrols to control the predator. This story happened not so long ago. I was home alone. I crocheted. This activity is great for killing time when your computer is broken. So, I'm sitting there and I hear someone knocking on the window. This is very strange because I live on the 6th floor and to climb onto our freaking balcony you need to be Spider-Man. I was shaking. This happens to me when something suddenly happens. I thought, maybe it's the neighbors. About a minute later, the knock was repeated. I was afraid to move. I was looking for an excuse for everything. She sat in silence for another 2 minutes, waiting. What if I imagined it? What if this is an evil, well-thought-out joke? Having collected myself a little, I continued knitting. Then I remembered the headphones and reached for them. They were lying on the table next to the sofa. As soon as I touched them, there was a loud bang on the glass. I screamed. Having climbed up onto the sofa with my feet, I looked in horror at the window covered with curtains. All this time, I did not see what was happening behind him. To be honest, I didn't want to see it. I listened and realized that something was rustling behind the back of the sofa. I also felt that the house became cold and uncomfortable, and of course, like in any horror film, the lights went out. The rustling noise continued from behind. It was as if thousands of little feet were running across the ceiling. This terrible stomp made me cry. At this time, the glass was hit again, and again, and again. It was as if they were beating out a rhythm. The stomping continued. There was still rustling behind me, only even louder and more brazenly despite me. But it didn't make me angry. Fear took over me. Suddenly, someone pulled my hair. With my peripheral vision, I saw that they were reaching behind the sofa. They are quite long. It hurt me and I screamed. All this noise did not stop. It drove me crazy. I felt terrible pain. I screamed at the top of my lungs. And then, as if someone hit the window with a bat with all their might, I heard a crack appear on the glass. I knew that the one outside the window was already close and was about to burst into the house. And everything that was happening around was his pranks. I was waiting for the final blow. The glass won't hold up, and he'll walk in. I couldn't run away. Something behind the sofa was still holding my hair. Tears rolled down from my eyes. The final blow sounded, and the glass shattered into pieces with a crash. All these sounds seemed to be tearing my brain apart. I prayed. It's quiet. I was shocked. My hair grew back, but I didn't notice it right away. I stared at the window and watched the curtain slowly rise. Someone's silhouette was visible behind her. I thought, that's it, honey. This is the end. But the worst was yet to come. I felt somehow strange, as if I was sitting not on the sofa but on something else. Someone was clearly touching me. I was afraid to be distracted from the window because he was still standing behind the curtains. Still, I made up my mind and lowered my eyes downwards. And then I saw that there were someone's terrible, dirty hands on my waist. It's like someone is holding me with their fingers locked. I realized where I was sitting. I no longer had the strength to scream. It was as if I was surrounded. I lost consciousness. I woke up in the morning to a phone call. The lights in the apartment were on. A friend called and asked how things were going. For some reason, I answered that everything was fine. We agreed to meet in a cafe to chat. I behaved as if nothing had happened. After hanging up the phone, I went to the window. I lifted the curtain. The glass was intact. And the apartment was in order. Maybe overwork? Maybe I didn't notice how I fell asleep and couldn't distinguish a dream from reality. But the facts say otherwise. I woke up crying and my head hurt very much, as if they really were pulling my hair hard. And one more thing. When I vacuumed after that, I found several pieces of glass. Well, how can I stay home alone now? On January 3rd, I arrived at my grandmother's new apartment. She moved. On the first day, I went to the balcony. There, I began to experience a strange sensation of power coming from below. I attributed this to the collector standing next to the house. I slept peacefully. The next morning, my grandmother left for the dacha, and I tearfully asked for leave. At 12 o'clock, I went to bed. Suddenly, a short howl was heard behind me. There was a wall behind me. I jumped up and turned around. There was nothing behind me. 5 minutes later, I fell asleep. I woke up in the morning at 5 o'clock. Suddenly, a light stomp was heard throughout the apartment. I got wildly scared and closed the door to my room. Until dawn, I sat in fear, because someone else was banging on my door. I spent the rest of the day carefully checking the apartment. It's starting to get dark. The window opened on its own. I quickly drank 3 cups of coffee and again locked myself in the room with light for the night. I slept halfway through January 6th, then sat on the internet and studied this issue. I sent my grandmother a text message not to worry. This night was no different from the previous one. I hope this night goes well. Then I locked myself in the room and chatted on my laptop with my friends. Olya, my friend, had a pajama party. This was the best way out so that when my brother crawled into the pool at night, he wouldn't fall on me. And I was bored because Mom and Dad left for another country and left us with a nanny. She was kind and let me go anywhere. The party was in full swing and the nanny called me. Nanny, I urgently need to go home, take care of my brother, and then at least fly to Mars. Me, with a sigh. Yes, of course. Nanny, bye. Me, bye. I headed towards the house with my head down, and suddenly again someone or something put their hands on my shoulders. I no longer paid attention to it and just walked. Well, I calmed my brother down and went to bed. Then, at about 2:27, my brother started yelling and asking to lie with me. No matter how much I hate him, he is my brother and I love him. Probably everyone who has brothers or sisters will understand me. Well, I took him in with me. He fell asleep and I became scared. He and I, 2 children, alone in a 2-story house. On the first floor there is a kitchen, living room and bathroom, and on the second there are 5 bedrooms, and after the stairs there is a kind of hall. This doesn't include the attic. It began to seem to me that I had not closed the front door and left another door open, but I was afraid to go out and check. Footsteps were heard in the corridor. My brother was also afraid and could not sleep. I closed the door to my room, and she invited her brother to play stalker on the laptop. I turned on the sconce and started texting on my phone in ICQ. Well, that's how we survived the night. After 3 days, my parents arrived, and I told them everything. They didn't believe me and said that I had read too many horror stories, and my brother, as luck would have it, confirmed this. The internet, as always, did not let go. With a gaping yawn, I scrolled through the lines that had long since become familiar and glanced almost every second at the clock, which was desperately approaching morning. But for some reason, I didn't want to sleep. I continued to wander around the World Wide Web, looking for at least a hint of something fresh and interesting, but apparently, the network itself was hinting to me that it was time to get some sleep. Not finding anything worth paying attention to, I, as always, left the player playing random tracks at night and settled down on the pillow. Twitching endlessly and adjusting the blanket, I finally began to fall asleep. Outside the window, something howled, knocked, and rustled. Outside the walls, shouts were heard, music sounded, and some clanging could be heard. In a house with walls like ours, this was not surprising. Through a light drowsiness, I seemed to enjoy these sounds and continued to fall deeper and deeper into sleep, feeling the numbness of my body. Suddenly, the door of the room opened slightly. It seemed to me then that it was a cat, because I felt a slight pressure in my legs. Opening my eyes for a moment, as happens when half asleep, I immediately closed them. I don't remember how much time passed from that moment, but it seemed to me that after a couple of minutes I opened my eyes slightly and saw that the light in the bathroom was on, although I live alone and always turn off the lights everywhere at night. Shifting my gaze slightly above the bed, I saw some kind of shadow crawling there. Before I had time to focus my gaze on her, I noticed movement behind the door. It would be appropriate to mention here that the door from my room has glass in the middle. A vague, ceiling-sized creature with a strange red appendage just below the back of its head was slowly moving from the bathtub into the corridor. I didn't see the face, but such a neck was physically incapable of holding up a head. And he also slid the top of his head along the ceiling, leaving a dark, smoking trail. Suddenly, he disappeared somewhere, and again, my attention was drawn to a shadow just above my bed. She started crawling onto my legs. The first seconds, they seemed like an eternity to me. I watched as she clung to the blanket, climbing, and suddenly I saw a pale, angry face. It creaked. Well, now we are left alone. And with the agility of a snake, it rushed at me. I screamed, jumped back to the headboard, hit the back of my head against the wall, and everything was gone. My friend's grandmother is a very prominent woman with hair as white as snow, styled in a high updo. Always well dressed, it's hard not to notice her. And always, no matter how many years passed, we greeted her. Although her granddaughter has not lived in our yard for a long time, they have an expensive large apartment and we live in the city center. Her husband holds a high position and a car always took her to work. In general, there is reason for envy. But in fact, this woman is very intelligent and kind. Here's what she said. As always happens, a man who is not quite old and has money is always an object for women with certain goals, as a rule, much younger than his legal wife. It so happened that my friend's grandmother began to notice strange behavior in her husband, either after work or leaving for a business meeting, etc. And one day he became very ill. He was taken away in an ambulance in acute pain, and the woman was faced with the fact that her husband needed long-term treatment for who knows what. Doctors were unable to make a diagnosis immediately and sent him for a long examination. Weeks passed, but her husband did not feel better, and other strange things began to happen. After my husband was taken to the hospital, it became difficult to stay in their apartment. An unbearable stench began to emanate from somewhere. Certain silhouettes began to appear, and my grandmother said that one day she was sitting at home alone and watching TV. Suddenly it seemed to her that someone ran past, then again, something quite large, maybe the size of a cat. Yes, it also spun like a top. The carpet it had crawled under seemed to be stirred by the wind. After this, she became so scared that the unfortunate woman decided to turn to a person with extrasensory abilities, popularly known as a sorcerer. She was immediately recommended a reliable person, not someone who advertises in the newspaper, but a real village hermit sorcerer who lives somewhere in the region and is quite difficult to get to. If it weren't for her friends, she wouldn't even know where he lives. It's scary, but when she arrived at his house, the sorcerer, a gloomy old man, was waiting for her on the threshold, as if he already knew about the visitor's arrival. From the first words, it became clear that he knew everything. This is what he said: "It's all your husband's mistress's fault. He brought her home while you were away, and she, I see it, put something in the pillows. Look in the pillows. There's a reason for everything. If you don't do anything, your husband will die, and you won't have any life in this apartment. What you find in the pillows, you will take in a sealed bag, don't touch with your hands, to a vacant lot where no people walk, and you will burn it, saying the words that I will teach you. Leave without looking back." The woman went home in shock, and the first thing she did was to tear open the pillows on which she and her husband slept. Her surprise and fear knew no bounds. Inside, all the pillows were carefully cut out, and something like funeral wreaths, dried flowers, etc., were placed inside. She wrapped it all in bags as the sorcerer had said without touching it with her hands, and carried it to the vacant lot. When the woman threw it into the fire, it did not want to burn at first, but when she began to say special words, the muck immediately crackled and smoke poured out. She decided to leave immediately, but her legs did not obey her. "I couldn't leave my place, and that's it." Then she again began to repeat her grandfather's words, and she was relieved. She left without ever looking back. After that, everything stopped in the apartment. My grandfather felt better and was discharged. How they made peace is another story. But about the woman with whom her husband was having an affair, my friend's grandmother soon found out that she was serious. It's just my imagination. Again, the sounds of someone's footsteps in an empty apartment, slamming doors, heavy sighs. It is the cerebral cortex that splashes out negative emotions. Whispers again. At first you don't pay attention to him, but then you realize that you are alone in the apartment. Someone whispers in your ear. Not sounds, not fragments of phrases, connected sentences. Quite a meaningful speech. Sometimes there is only one voice. Sometimes there are many. Sometimes the whisper becomes louder and speech flows in a low voice. One day a voice barely audibly whispered something, and suddenly, quickly, very quickly, a crazy crescendo turned into a cry. "Come here!" Here. It was loud, loud to the point of pain. I shook my head. It just seems to me. One day I sharpened a pencil over the toilet. Then she returned to her room. About 5 minutes later, I heard someone go into the toilet, flush the water, come out, close the door, and flip the switch. I heard the tank filling up. Nothing special. Probably one of the parents. But why does this bother me so much? Why? Because there are no parents at home. I am absolutely alone. I went to the toilet and looked into the toilet. The sawdust was still floating there. No one flushed the water. At that moment, the door slammed in the living room. Then everything stopped. I haven't heard anything like this for 6 months now. It's just my imagination. Hello. Many people do not believe in the other world, but in vain. The story may not seem scary to some. When I was 13 years old, my family and I bought an apartment. One day, Mom and Dad went to visit. I didn't want to go. 2 hours passed. There was a knock on the door. I thought they had finally arrived. I opened it. No one. It was starting to get dark. I called my mom. The subscriber was not available. I called my dad. The same thing. I felt a little scared and sat down to watch TV. And suddenly, the lights go out. It was already 2114, winter. I was sitting on the couch in complete darkness and shaking with fear. I think they should turn on the lights sooner. About 4 minutes later, there is another knock on the door. I, seeing nothing, get up and feel my way. I approach the door, hear a roar behind me, turn around. Everything is quiet. I open the latch. No one. I became unbearably scared and I started calling my mom and dad. Finally, Mom answered. Hello? Mom, where are you? I'm afraid. Come home. Daughter, we'll be late, okay? Bye. I was shocked. Mom didn't react at all to the words, I'm scared. I lit a candle. The light swayed in different directions as if in a storm, although it stood still and the windows were closed. This alarmed me. A shadow quickly flashed past me and the candle went out. There was a lot of noise, doors opening and closing. I, unable to stand it, shouted, Enough! Everything suddenly became quiet. There was dead silence. Without hesitation, I flew out of the house, knocking everything down on the fly. I met Mom and Dad on the landing. They started shouting, Why was your phone switched off? I called you 5 times. I speak, Mom, your phone was turned off and you said you'd be late. She shook her head and said she didn't say that and the phone was on. I briefly told what happened to me in the apartment. We decided to go to our grandmother. We quickly got into the car and looked at the window. A light was visible from the window. It turned off and on, as if someone was playing with it. When we arrived, we told Grandma everything. She said that her best friend lived there, but she died soon after. And now this house is cursed. Everyone runs away from there. Then everything got better. We went to pick up our things in the morning and met our neighbors on the doorstep. They said that at night there was such a noise that our ears were blocked, dishes were breaking, things were falling. I was left alone in the apartment for several days. A friend came to visit me, bringing with her a kitten she bought from the metro. By evening, this kitten annoyed me so much that we threw him into the next room and locked ourselves in mine. We sat, listened to music, talked about life, and suddenly we heard a terrible roar in the next room. I was too lazy to go check what this smoky mitten dropped there, but the roar soon repeated, and more than once, and the kitten clearly had nothing to do with it. There were simply no such heavy things in the room lying where they could be dumped. He wasn't actually moving furniture, was he? It couldn't have happened to the neighbors either. It was clear from the sound that the noise was coming from my apartment. Meanwhile, the roar continued, and the kitten suddenly began to meow heartbreakingly and scratch at the door, but we didn't want to open it at all. My friend suddenly felt an inexplicable fear, which she immediately reported to me. To be honest, I was in the same state. No one could get into the apartment. We locked the door, and if anything happened, we would have heard them picking it with master keys. And yet, someone was thundering there. We are far from alarmists. We are not afraid of our own shadow. But I felt a chill in my stomach, and she was not at all calmer. The roar and cat concert with short breaks continued for an indecently long time, sometimes right outside our door. We wanted to go to the toilet, drink, and sleep, but we would not agree to open the door for any price. The friend suddenly said in a trembling voice that whoever or whatever it was had come for her. However, this fact did not particularly reassure me, since this dirty trick was rampant in my house, where nothing like this had ever happened before. Going through her friend's enemies didn't yield much results. She had so many of them that it was hard to figure out who to think about. For some reason, she was sure that the Thunderer had come for a reason, but that someone had sent him. Around 3 in the morning, this madhouse finally stopped. The kitten calmed down too, and we fell asleep in a completely insane state. The story ends there, and the kitten, as it turned out, did not live long after this story. I had a case when I was a child, around 12, 13 years old. During the summer holidays, it so happened that both parents went on a business trip. So I was already a big boy and the Union was still Soviet. I was left to my own devices under the periodic supervision of a neighbor. My friends left for the holidays, so all I could do was sit at home. In principle, such a pastime did not bother me. I read books, tinkered with assembling various things from construction sets, went swimming, and there was a lot of homework for the summer. But that week when my parents were away flew by like an hour for me. Nothing registered in my consciousness, as if nothing had happened at all. Although later, having opened one book, I realized that I had already read it, apparently during this period. I went swimming since the coach had no complaints against me. Missing classes would have been a lot of headaches. I was assembled from a construction set, quite a complex model. Many mathematical problems from homework have been solved. And my neighbor regularly fed me lunch and apparently did not find anything strange in my behavior. The reasons are still unclear to me. I'm not at all suggestible. I'm not hysterical. I didn't have any head diseases. I perceived my parents' departure completely calmly. There also seemed to be no triggers that could provoke such a situation.